There. Hey, everybody. Welcome. If you're here today, you're probably curious about what behavioral economics is, or you might be familiar with it, and you want to understand how can it be applied to product design. So I'll get to the technical definition shortly, but from a practical perspective, you can think about behavioral economics as a tool or a ladder that you can use to help your users overcome obstacles. Now, specifically, obstacles that block them from taking action in your product or in their daily lives. So in this Simpson cartoon, they've placed the donuts far away from Homer and put the fruit right in front of him. The idea that that'll help him eat healthy food. Now, they're actually talking about something quite real, which is a major concept in behavioral economics called choice architecture, which is the environment in which a choice occurs shapes what action a person will take. And you can change that environment. You can think about strategically that environment, the product you supply to people, the application you give, in order to encourage one action or another. And overall, behavioral economics rigorously studies the decision-making process. And how people behave. And it looks particularly at what can be done to encourage or nudge people towards good outcomes. Now, in this case, beyond being a cute cartoon of The Simpsons, this idea of in fact, food placement has been studied in real life quite a bit. And similar concepts have been applied to user interfaces in products, as I'll talk about shortly. It's one of the many examples where these techniques have been used to help encourage things like better eating habits. Now, behavioral techniques are also used to understand, well, habits, things that are routine in our daily lives, and those habits can be good ones, like practicing a language or going running, and they also could be bad ones, like checking Twitter every 8.5 seconds, like some of us sometimes do. So today, what I want to do is I'll give you a deeper understanding of behavioral economics, what it is, a bit of the background, and then I want to talk about really what does it mean for product design. What are some core lessons that we can apply in our daily lives? We'll talk a bit more about habits in particular because they're so exciting and there's a lot of discussion about them in the field. And then finally, as time allows, I'd like to talk about the process that behavioral economists use in order to understand these quirks and understand how the mind works. Because in addition to the findings, we can apply this same process to our user discovery and design process to better understand our users and really see how they work in their daily lives. Now, you're going to quickly see that I'm a very informal guy, so feel free anytime, just shoot a chat message. I'm going to pause at the end of each section to see if people have questions, but at any time, just go over. I've got the chat window open. I'm looking at comments as they come in. So feel free, ask questions as we go along. Happy to answer, go off on tangents, etc. So now with that, as Yasmina mentioned, I'm a behavioral social scientist, and I work as the head researcher at a company called HelloWallet. Now we're a B2B company, and we work with some of the largest companies in the country to provide their employees with independent financial guidance. As we developed the software, though, many years ago, we quickly learned that, everybody and their mother knows that saving for the future is important and that credit card debt is bad. No great surprise there. To actually help people do something about it and take control of their finances and take control of their lives, you need to do something more. You need to understand the psychology and the obstacles that people are actually facing and not just yell at them. And so we turn to behavioral economics to help us do that, and it's worked immensely for us. As Yasmina mentioned, I've written a book on these topics about behavioral econ and particularly how to apply it to product development. This is from the lessons we learned at HelloWallet, and also I talked to dozens of other companies in the field. So the book is Designing for Behavior Change, and much of what I'll talk about today is coming from that. Just if you want to learn more about these topics, I'd encourage you to check it out. Okay. So with that, what is behavioral economics? In short, more formal definition, in short, it's a combination of psychology and economics. It overturns the common assumption in econ that people are perfect, rational machines, doing only what makes sense, only what they believe is going to be in their ideal behavior at that moment. It overturns that and says, okay, really, how do we actually behave and why? Behavioral econ is a particular term we use for people that have studied economics in school, usually with a PhD in econ, and then use these tools to ask behavioral questions. But there's also a related and much older field in psychology called the psychology of judgment and decision making. It just hasn't received the same press recently as behavioral econ does. But they both study the same thing. How can we understand the quirks of our behavior and encourage people, one way or another, to do what they want to do, but face obstacles? So I'm going to use the term behavioral econ in this talk, but really many of the insights come from both fields, both very related fields. Now, these lessons from behavioral econ and the psychology of judgment decision making, you've probably seen them in some popular press books, like Dick Thaler and Cass Sunstein's book Nudge, wonderful book, Dan Ariely's Predictably Irrational, or Danny Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. He's the Nobel laureate who helped found the field in the first place. And we're also starting to see practitioner books which talk about specifically applying these ideas to design. Mine is one example, but Stephen Anderson's book, Seductive Interaction Design, is absolutely excellent. Dan Lockton's Design with Intent Toolkit is also very good, talking about what does this really mean for the bits and bytes on the screen? What does it mean for buttons? What does it mean for placement? What does it mean for layout, etc.? So what are some of the core lessons that we can take from behavioral econ, that's in some of these books and my own, etc., that we can apply to product design? Well, let's start with one of the most straightforward and practical findings. And by the way, I saw a little comment about from Kim about seductive interaction design. You're right. Wonderful book, very practical. I love it as well. So see, I am looking at the chat windows. Please feel free to ask additional questions or make comments as we go along. Thanks, Kim. So again, what are some of the core lessons? I'll start with one of the most straightforward and powerful lessons, which is when we're faced with a choice, the default option that we're given is immensely powerful. In other words, whether we're opted in or opted out of something. In many circumstances, people just follow the default option. So here's on the screen is one of my favorite graphics about defaults. Now, the great similarities between the countries on the left, the three countries on the left, and the three countries on the right. Germany, many similarities to Austria. Netherlands, many similarities to Belgium. But their organ donation rates, which is what you see on the screen, are completely different. And the reasons they're different has nothing to do with culture, people's motivation, marketing campaigns, etc. As you probably figured out right now, the countries on the right default people into the organ donation program and give them the option to say no, while the countries on the left do the reverse. They default people out and then give them the option to say yeah. The problem is most people just don't care enough to say yes or no. They believe that organ donation is important, but they're not going to go to the trouble of filling out the card, etc. They just go with the default. Now we see this. We see the same effect in wildly diverse contexts. So here's an example from my own field. This is from retirement savings, where when you opt people into a retirement savings plan, that creates a huge jump in savings. Now the top line, without opting people in, is after education programs, after a tremendous number of ads on TV telling people how important retirement is, their mother, their dog, everybody telling them how important retirement is, etc. And then this slight change of nothing to do with motivation, nothing to do with the action, just defaulting them in and giving them an option to leave if they don't. Boom, huge jump in retirement savings. And this is after again and again on surveys, people say that they want to save. So it's not something against their will. They want to save, but this slight change makes it much, much more likely that they actually will. Now, why does this happen? Okay, why are defaults so powerful? Obviously, some of this is pure and simple laziness, of course, right? But the answer, the deeper answer, helps us uncover some of the profound lessons from behavioral econ and the psychology of decision making. Quite often, something else beyond laziness is going on. Even when we want to act, we don't do so because of our basic human frailties and limitations. So here are 4 examples that researchers have documented extensively. The first one in the top left is our limited attention. Often, we won't change a default. Well, more generally, right, we won't take some action in a product. We won't check out this new feature. We won't log back in again, whatever it might be, just because we aren't thinking about it. We're busy thinking about our jobs, our friends, our dogs, our cats, whatever. And something needs to grab our attention for us to actually take action in the product. Now, one of my favorite studies in behavioral econ showed how sending people a text message, a simple text message, reminding them of something that they'd already committed to doing, they strongly believed in doing and wanted to do, in this case, it was putting aside money for savings, helps people actually do it. Yeah, so a text message was enough to strongly change behavior. And as the researchers put it, that text message got the idea to the top of mind of the individuals and said, oh, yeah, this is something I decided I wanted to do. Now I remember, I'll go do it right now. I know some of you are thinking, this is bloody obvious. And you are exactly right. It's bloody obvious. But yet, when we're developing our products time and time again, we forget it. We think that having a great product is enough. If it's really enjoyable, if it provides clear value, etc. People will come to us because of our product is great. And that just doesn't happen in most cases. Instead, people need reminders. So similarly, looking past this human frailty of limited attention, similarly, the research literature is rife with examples of our limited ability to handle complex decisions. When we're faced with a complex question, our minds often substitute a simpler, related question or use a heuristic. So for example, right, if you ask people to pick investment options from a diverse array of stocks and bonds, often they're just going to pick equally from each one. You give them 10 options, they're going to put 1/10 of their money in each one. And that's because it's a simple heuristic for diversification. It happens to be completely wrong in most cases. But it's a simpler answer where the complex analyses that you would have to make of those funds is actually quite difficult. And so we substitute a simpler problem. We use a heuristic for it. Now, other strands of research many of you may have come across show how poor our memory is and how our willpower or our ability to resist temptation varies widely throughout the day. And willpower in particular, for example, is depleted by everything from stressful conditions to hunger. Let me see. Before I leave this slide, I just wanted to respond to one of the questions. Someone was asking about the text message study. So that one is called Getting to Top of Mind. It's a great study done 2 years ago, I believe. And you can see this. Look for Dean Carlin, John Zinman, and Maggie McConnell were on that particular paper. So please, any other questions people have, just keep them coming. Otherwise, I'll continue with the presentation as well. So we talked about these 4 limitations: attention, complex decisions. You bet, Sean, happy to answer your question. Attention, complex decisions, memory, willpower, etc. That's nice, right? What does it actually mean for product design? It means we have to design around these limitations. We can't assume that people will remember to use your product or take action within it. So plan specifically the cues that you want to use. So like push notifications, emails, a blimp going through the sky, whatever it might be, you need to remind people. You need to remind people to exercise, to log into your application, to upload their photos, whatever it might be. And second, simplify those complex decisions and those complex processes wherever possible, like the beautiful onboarding sequence that you can see in the bottom left corner, which is from 500 Pixels, showing how to use their simple menu and app. Could be very complex, but they say, all right, here are the 3 things, here's what's going on, no big deal. This is a core lesson that the UX community learned long ago, but we don't always apply in our daily product design. And the research literature backs it up quite strongly. Look for simplification. Focus on the things that really matter. Don't overwhelm people with complex choices. You also don't want to rely on memory, especially in moving from one screen to the next. So you remember those old puzzles you'd see in kids' magazines? Okay, I still do them too. I'm sure some of you guys too. Where you're asked to spot the differences between two images, right? How is this different? Is there a bird in one and not in the other? Whatever it might be, right? They were fun because we're really bad at it. It's not something that comes naturally to us. But yet we ask our users to do this time and time again in our products. We're really bad at remembering the exact details of what you saw on a previous screen and entering that information into a new screen. So this happens quite often with form entry. You're asking users a series of questions, et cetera, and one of the questions is then based on the previous one. Well, if it's something obvious about their lives, great. If it's some detailed thing that you've just given feedback about, et cetera, yeah, they're going to generally remember it, but they probably weren't paying enough attention to have stored that one thing in their minds and kept it as they go from screen to screen, especially as you go multiple screens out. So watch out for sequences of interaction that require people to hold numbers or data in their heads between screens. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, don't ask users to rely on willpower alone when it comes to taking action. Every time I see a pledge to stop smoking, it drives me crazy. It's not because commitment is lacking. People that want to stop smoking want to stop smoking, right? It's the addiction, which I'll talk about shortly, the habit that it builds, and it's other things about environment that are lacking. And so telling people willpower alone is enough is crazy. Now, obviously, pledges like this, they have a lot more going on, and they have useful features like social accountability, et cetera. But the lesson about willpower is the same. Don't ask your users to man up and just do what's needed. Instead, find ways to help them that decrease their need to use willpower alone. And we'll talk about what some of those are shortly. So in addition to this sad and extended story about our great human frailties, there are lots of other things that behavioral economics have studied and documented for us. One of them is choice overload, where too many options paralyzes people and makes them less likely to act. It's this great paradox, in fact, that we're attracted to things that have lots of features, lots of options, lots of complexity. But when we're actually faced with using the darn things, we throw up our hands. It's just too much work, too difficult for us to handle at one time. Now, of course, this never happens in any of our products. This never happens in any menus. Might be showing an example on the screen. Complex apps are great for people who know them and already have built the expertise because it gives them lots of power. But for everybody else, they paralyze, just like the multiple choices, the overwhelming choices that research have studied in everything from jam to investment options. Now, another way to think about this problem, right, is how do we help people overcome willpower? How do we help people change behavior when they want to take action but they struggle? Well, one way around this is to automate. Now, wearable computing products like the Jawbone UP or apps like Runkeeper do this really well. So an important part of exercise is knowing how much you're already exercising, right? If you want to exercise more, you're going to know where you're starting from. The problem is that tracking exercise, well, to put it bluntly, that sucks. It's a pain in the butt. Who wants to, when they walk from the metro to their office or whatever it might be, or they go biking, wants to write down, oh yeah, well, I spent exactly this much time, it was probably this many steps, burned this many calories. That's horrible. That's why so few people do it. So bands like the Jawbone UP or the Basis band, the one that I've got, they automate this problem altogether. They just do it for you automatically. So you can think of automation as a fancier, ongoing version of defaults. If the user wants to do something differently, they can. You never want to take out the free will and the choice and the sense of control, right? You want to focus on what do they actually want to do, as Carrie just mentioned in a comment, right? The important part isn't the tracking. Get that out of the way if you can and help them focus on the exercising, on the part that they enjoy, the part that's actually rewarding for them. The system just takes care of it. You can think about it like this. The most effective way to change behavior is not to require that people change behavior at all. Instead, it's to shift the burden of work from the individual to the product, like exercise trackers do automatically, and then focus on the next problem, in this case, actually exercising more rather than just tracking. Now, of course, automation isn't possible in all cases, and so when a choice is needed, often we just don't know what's the right thing to do or not. Should I start using this app or not? Should I trust this website? Is using electricity something that's really important, or is it just a minor factor in global warming that makes people feel good, right? Who knows? And so in these circumstances, we look to our peers. We look to see what everyone else is doing, or what people we trust are doing, right? We see, well, if they're doing it, that makes sense. All right, I can do this. No big deal, right? It's I call it a yes we can, yes I can as well as yes I should. Yes I can because by looking to your peers you say, oh, okay, this is something you can succeed at, right? It's something that you'll probably be able to do. And yes I should is, oh man, they're doing it. What the heck am I doing if I'm not doing it too, right? It sets a social norm. So the example on the screen comes from OPower, which has built a billion-dollar industry, billion-dollar business, after simply providing these peer comparisons that say, hey, you're spending this much on electricity. Neighbors like you are spending this much. There you go. Here's some tips on things you can do to decrease your energy usage. It's wonderful, very effective, and a quite beautiful example of just this simple intervention, behavioral intervention, to help people do things they already want to do, save money on electricity. Stepping back from that, probably the single most important lesson from behavioral economics and especially from the related psychology work is that often we're just not thinking about the actions we're taking at all. Or more correctly, is we're not thinking consciously about whether to do A or B. Instead, a lot of the time, we're on autopilot. We're doing whatever we did in the past and whatever feels right, based on an intuitive assessment, right? Should I continue to use this mail program? Well, I've been using the mail program for the last 5 years, and I have this habit of always checking in the morning, right? Overcoming that is a tremendously difficult problem. And so if you're trying to change a habit, similarly, if you're trying to build a habit, you get great power because of this autopilot. And that's what we're going to talk about next. We'll talk about habits and other forms of mental autopilot. But first, I just want to stop and take a breather to look at the chat window and see if there are other questions. Please go ahead and shoot other questions you might have as well. I'll take a look here. And I'm also going to get a drink. 1 second, folks.
And I'll chime in for a moment, too. For folks that joined a little bit late as we began the program, if you do have a question for Stephen and what he's talking to you about today, open your group chat widget. It's that little brown widget tray and a little widget in the tray. To click on it, open it, type in your question, send it in, and he'll take as many as we have time for. And actually, we do have a question in from Doug. Let me know when you're ready.
Yeah.
Okay,
sorry.
Does adhering to social norms play a role in accepting the default too?
Interesting. Quite possibly, and I really don't know. To be frank, I'm a researcher, and most of the things we don't know. I think that's an interesting avenue to explore. I haven't seen those two literatures. They're often different groups of researchers that do that work, and I haven't seen yet an overlap between the two. But that's a great question.
Perfect. And then one just in now in the group chat there from Marcus. Could you give another example of shifting the work burden?
Yeah, of course. So, all right. So this is one near and dear to my heart. It comes from HelloWallet. It's similar to the exercise one. So, in order to take control of your finances, an important part of that is knowing how much you spend. The problem is, tracking how much you spend is a pain in the butt. But it's very easy if a system has access to your credit card data and credit card and your checking account, right? So that's something that we do, and a variety of other programs do as well. We hook into the person's checking, credit card, savings account, whatever, and then we automatically analyze. Okay, this memo, target, whatever, it means this. When they went to pay less, they were buying shoes, etc. And then we automatically aggregate, this is how much they're spending, and this is how it relates to their goals. And so that's shifting the burden of work on basically tracking your budget and seeing your progress from the individual, having to keep track of everything they spend, and we're really bad at that. Lots of books on mental accounting. I could point you to if you're interested. Towards the software, which does it automatically, right? Shifts the burden of work to the software, and then moves on to the next problem. The next problem, of course, being, okay, deciding what you want to spend less, setting goals around that, etc. And I saw a number of comments in there about setting goals as well, which is an important part of it. And there's a whole literature about the types of goals, setting small steps, etc. But that's exactly right. You're shifting the burden of work from the individual to the product for this one particular task, in this case, tracking spending, so that you can then focus on something that's harder and can't be automated, like spending less. There you go. Yeah, you bet. Happy to answer your question. And I'm just going to look over real quick and see if there are any more. We're about at the halfway point for the talk anyway. Oh, Java just had Java Built, I think is very nice. Very nice name. Reminds me of The Simpsons, Java Built. So I see the comment about someone gaining weight and swapping plates. Awesome. In fact, I just did this in my own house as well. So this is an example of the choice architecture, of the environment in which someone makes decisions. So most of our eating habits are, and this is kind of building on one of the examples I just gave, most of our eating behavior is habitual. We're not thinking about it. And it's based on cues in our environment. One of the main cues is how much space is left on the plate. If the plate is empty, fine, I'm done eating. There you go. It actually takes 15, 20 minutes for your stomach to actually signal, oh, yeah, I'm full. But by that point, you've already eaten way too much. So that's why we rely on cues in our environment, like looking at plates. And so Brian Wansink, great researcher up at Cornell, he heads the Food and Brand Lab there. He studied the impact of just doing plate size, changing plate size. You can get a drastic change in eating behavior by shrinking from, say, a 13-inch plate down to a 9-inch plate. He did a study on ice cream, for example, that showed just using smaller bowls and smaller spoons decreases how much ice cream people eat by something amazing, like 57%. I'm sorry if I'm quoting it not quite exactly, but somewhere in that range. It's a huge difference just by changing that cue in the environment. So thank you for that comment. I see the next question is about habits, and I will answer that. But let's do that as part of the next section, which is about habits. So that's a great segue. But as I'm going, please add additional questions or comments as we go along. There'll be more opportunities to pause. Okay. All right. Sorry, let me just take one more drink here of water. And we're good to go. So, habits are one type of our decision making. And you can think of our decision making on a continuum. That on one extreme, there are unfamiliar situations with really important decisions that prompt us to use a conscious, deliberative process. Now, this happens when people are applying to take out a mortgage, for example, whether it's be online or in person, right? And on the other extreme, habits are automatic behaviors that occur in familiar environments where we've taken the same action again and again and again in the past. And no deliberation or conscious thought really occurs at all. And everything else we do lies somewhere in between. For example, when you're buying a gadget like an iPad, we rarely perform a true cost-benefit analysis of the purchase, the opportunity cost of using that money, our welfare, the expected lifespan, etc. We just don't do all that stuff. For really big purchases, we might, but for an iPod, whatever, we won't. Instead, we have a gut sense of whether this thing would be interesting, whether it fits our lifestyle, whether it seems to make sense, whether we seem to have enough money for it. And this is an intuitive reaction that lies between a pure habit and a conscious deliberative process. Now, that intuitive process, this intuitive reaction, is still a form of autopilot. It's not what we think of as the Western ideal of rational conscious benefit analyses. It's still a type of autopilot because we're just reacting to what we're doing there. Now, habits in particular have received a lot of attention recently. And so let's dive into a little bit about that. Habits, strictly speaking, are an association between a cue in the environment and a routine. When you see X, you do Y. Habits are the brain's way of outsourcing control over our behavior to the environment. That phrase, outsourcing control of our behavior, comes from Wendy Wood. Just to give you a bit of background, she's one of the leading habit researchers in the world. And sometimes, in addition to the cue and the routine that I talked about, right, habits have a third element, which is a reward, something nice that happens after you complete the routine. Now, the reward could be anything. It can be something like the pleasant caffeine rush of drinking coffee. It can be money from a slot machine. It can be points earned in a game. And over time, that reward becomes associated with the cue. We hunger for the reward when we see the cue. We even actively search out for it in order to get that reward. Now, these types of habits are like, and often are, addictions. The desire for the high or the other reward at the end seems to take control of our behavior even when we don't consciously want it anymore. And these three things, cue, routine, and optionally a reward, are the building blocks of a habit. And that's what a product needs in order to create them. And that's also what we need to understand when we're trying to change them. So putting aside the theory, I can talk for quite some time about Wendy Wood's research and other researchers in the field about habits. Let's look a little bit about the practice. So habits are increasingly big business for product companies. They can be used for good things like overcoming our cognitive frailties. When you make something habitual, it no longer requires willpower. So for example, Jawbone UP and Nike Fuel Band, etc., they help people build the access of exercise, build the habit of exercising. And the Rosetta Stone in the language space helps people build the habit of practicing a new language. Livestrong, their My Quit app, it uses this knowledge of habits to help people break the habit of smoking. But of course, habits can also drive unhealthy behaviors and against the will of people executing them. So for most of us, as I mentioned before about plates, what we eat is a habit, and how we eat it is a habit. Where we do it, what time we do it, etc. How quickly we eat, etc. So Facebook explicitly builds the habit of logging in, posting, or checking status frequently. Amazon built the habit of immediately buy this with their one-click system. How many times have you found yourself buying something on Amazon that you just really didn't care about and you wouldn't have spent the money on if you'd thought about it carefully? Well, they've successfully built the habit of, see something interesting, just press the one-click button. When we're doing that, it doesn't even bubble up into conscious awareness at all until after we've made the purchase. And then we rationalize and say, oh yeah, this must have been great, right? Or we wonder what the heck we were thinking when we did it, because it's a built-in habit. And Amazon has done a wonderful job of that, for good or for ill. They've done it very effectively, I should say. Now, if you wanted to actually help somebody build a habit, what would you do? There are two big options. I love this quote from Aristotle. He points to the first one, which is, first and foremost, building a habit, you just repeat it, right? Our mind learns the patterns of conscious behavior, and they build habits for the things that we do often. Remember, they're outsourcing. They're saying, well, this is something we're doing very often. I'd rather be thinking about this tiger that's coming to eat me rather than about this habit of whatever, right? Habit is a long-term technique that our minds have since our early days. The kicker is that in order for that habit to form, we have to repeat the same action with the same cue in a consistent way again and again and again. And to the question of how long it takes, the short version is it varies. So it varies based on how consistent that environment is, for example, right, and how frequently you take the action. And it also seems to vary from person to person. There's only some initial research that's gone on to this question, and we're not quite sure, but the popular idea of 23 days is completely bogus. that doesn't seem to be right. That was just somebody making a claim back in the 50s that has grown to be a very effective meme. Instead, habits can take 15 days, 3 months, depends on what you're doing. Oh, sorry, yeah, it's a 21-day habit is a misrepresentation. Thank you for that quote, Java built. Right, it was a plastic surgeon in the 1950s. Thank you for filling in for my cognitive frailty of not remembering all of that stuff. Cool. So, yes, very nice. And Manesh mentioned the exact same thing. Thanks, guys, for the help here as I'm talking. So that repetition is extremely important. Exactly how much it takes for a particular habit you really need to explore. There is no blanket answer there. Okay. I hope that answered your question earlier about how long it takes to build a habit. Now, this form of habit building is what a lot of programs do, right? This is how people learn to rapidly navigate the menus in your app, right? They do it enough times, they know where to find things. And when you change that menu structure, when you change the information architecture of your system, you're now handicapping people. You're not allowing them to use the habit that they've already built. And even worse, they're going to be frustrated because they have this habit, and it sees a cue, oh, I've just logged into your product. They want to go do this thing, but they can't. Their habit is now being overridden. It can't be used. So we also see very similar things in games. You learn how to navigate a Super Mario, a shoot-'em-up game, whatever it might be, because you do it again and again, right? You don't learn how to use the joystick because or the handheld controller. See, I'm dating myself here. Because inherently that motion itself is enjoyable because you do it so many times and you're doing it towards something that's enjoyable later on, which points to the second way of forming a habit. So beyond just having somebody do something again and again, like use your menus, you can add that reward at the end. Now, a particular framework that I like is Nirayal's model, the hooked model, where, as you can see up here, he's got the standard framework of a trigger, an action, and a reward, or cue, routine, and reward. But he adds a final step, which is an optional thing that product designers can do, which is investment. Which is, can you find ways that after each time a person takes an action, it makes it easier for them to take the action again? In other words, you build this cycle of repetition. You take the action, oh, now it's easier to do it again. Now it's easier to do it again, etc. Right? And so some examples of investment would be as you load photos to a photo sharing site, right? The more photos you have up there, the more valuable it is to you. Because, hey, that's where you store all your photos. It's not just this place where you're putting up their first one. Each individual addition makes it more valuable to you. I should say that Nir just came out with a book, Hooked, which you can read more about his model. Let me give you two other examples here. Evernote, same idea, right? The more notes that you put in there, the more valuable it becomes. At the beginning, it's just like a notepad, right? You can type stuff, you can save it. But when you start with dozens of those, hundreds of those, you categorize them, you organize them, whatever they might be, wow, it becomes immensely valuable. It becomes easier each time for you to use it. Because you're like, oh, yeah, okay, well, I want to search for this thing. It's I have all this data already in Evernote. I go and search there, and now I just add a new note, etc., right? Similarly, Facebook, right? The more friends you have on Facebook, the more you've used Facebook, the more valuable it becomes to you, and the more you've invested in using the system. And each time you use it, you're repeating in a consistent context, and the more times you repeat, eventually you build a habit around it. I should say building a habit is a bit of a misnomer. It's a continuum like anything else. There are levels of this automatic behavior. You can start off and it's a little automatic, and then over time it becomes completely controlled by your automatic processing. So it builds. It's not just a light switch that goes on. Okay? Now, obviously some things are never going to be a habit. I mentioned earlier mortgages, right? When you're applying for a mortgage, thankfully most of us never do it often enough that we can build a strong association between cue and routine. Similarly, when you're applying for a job, hopefully you're not applying for so many jobs that it becomes habitual. You might do it on a single job, right? You send out lots of resumes. But I mean, over the course of your life, you're going to change your resume, you're going to change your approach, et cetera. You're learning. So it's important to remember, even though the great excitement about habits in the field, that they're a particular thing for a particular circumstance of repeated interactions. I mentioned that example for buying gadgets, and as you think about the spectrum of decision making, from very familiar environments where no thinking is required and a habit is possible, to the unfamiliar or the highly important, where you do intensive thinking and really your conscious mind is engaged, the types of interventions you need, the types of actions you can take in your product to help people proceed vary depending on that circumstance. You have to understand where people are coming from and what their environment is. So if I love the example of exercise, so I keep on using that. On the left-hand side, you see the Moves app, which automatically tracks how far you've walked, right? Habit, don't thinking, you're not thinking about walking, great, takes care of it. On the right-hand side is an example from the CFPB. They just came and gave a talk about this work for a group I work with called Action Design DC. And in their example, they said, all right, well, mortgages are never going to be a habit. They're never going to be intuitive. They're always this big conscious process. So what can we do? We simplify. And for everything else, in between those two extremes, how can you help users take action? Well, they're implicit. They're sort of autopilot, but they're not entirely. They're autopilot, but they're not entirely habitual. Well, you build associations. Not that cause people to automatically take an action, but to make them feel better about it, to trust it, etc. One negative example that I like to use is the Marlboro Man. Marlboro Man, they used the strong feeling that our society had at the time, not so much anymore, but at the time had for the rugged Western cowboy, and attached their brand to it and said, whenever you think about Marlboro, think about rugged Western cowboy, and built that positive sense. Now we can do this, of course, in good ways in our products as well. Medium, for example, is a great online shared blog effectively, but it doesn't look like an online shared blog. It doesn't look like just a lot of people putting up their notes. It looks beautiful. It looks like a magazine. It looks like something you'd put on your coffee table to show your guests that you're sophisticated. They're building on that association between beautifully well-crafted journalism and effectively a blog, right? They're using that intuitive processing of the intuitive decision-making process. Do I read this thing? Do I not? Do I read this or do I read a news site? Whatever it is. And they're using an association in this way. Now, there's a tremendous amount more that one could talk about these different types of decision-making. I discuss it a lot in my book. And I see Yasmina has just put in a link to it on designing for behavior change. But let's move on past the particular lessons, the findings of behavioral economics and the related psychology, and let's talk about the approach. How we can apply similar approaches to see the distinct and particular user behavior for a given set of users and a given product. Before I do that, let me just stop for a second and see what comments people have. I see Marie has a link to BJ Fogg's 5-day habit sessions, right? Tiny Habit, that's cool. I've done those before. BJ actually did the foreword for my book. He's a great guy. I definitely suggest trying that out. He's breaking down the concept of habits into the smallest thing and then building up over time. It's quite interesting, and you can check out that link. Let's see, other questions people have. Using Laramie instead of Marlboro, noted, good. Right. I see the comment about buying Apple products because you're comfortable with your interface. Absolutely. Two things going on there, right? There may be a habit of buying within their system, and another is that association where, just like the Marlboro or Laramie, et cetera, you already have a general feeling of good about this, and so you're much more willing to buy similar things or use similar products in that space, right? Here's a question, do you think budgeting can become a habit? Yes, absolutely. It can, because it's something that you can do every purchase, queue, log what you're doing, right? That would be the tracking part. Or every first Monday of the month, sit down with your spouse. That's a cue, routine, sit down with your spouse, and plan out how much you want to spend for the month. So yes, I think it definitely can become a habit. One thing we try to do at HelloWallet and other folks as well is we try and minimize that work. So we try and take automation as much as possible, and then the remaining chunk is either habit or intuitive reaction. Does this seem right? Does this not? But yeah, I think it certainly could become a habit. So great question. Thank you. All right. I see a couple other related comments, but I think we've covered the general stuff there. And please just send another message if there's something you think I'm missing there. I think we've covered a lot of very good comments on click-throughs and habitual behavior. Right, a good example of user abuse, as it's called, when the interface changes and it becomes terribly frustrating because you already have a habit. That's a great example. Thank you. But okay, great. Let's move on, and just got a little bit left to go, and we've got 10, 12 minutes left, so I think we'll be fine. In brief, how can you understand for your particular users what's going on, what obstacles they face? How can we use the lessons from behavioral economics? The first and most important place to start is, you could say with a certain type of humility, is that we know how cool our products are. We know how absolutely awesome are. That's why we spend our time on them, right? That's why I develop HelloWallet. That's why other folks work on their products. And that is nowhere near enough for someone actually to take action, for someone to actually build a habit of using it. Instead, we have to look at the particular obstacles that people are facing. There are no universal solutions, all right, just motivate people more and they'll do it. There's more than motivation involved. And that's one of the core lessons from behavioral economics. Human behavior is just too complex. We have to look beyond this, beyond value and beyond the motivation that people have, and look for the obstacles. Now, one way that HelloWallet we use to kind of analyze those obstacles is we break it up into 5 things. Are they obstacles of attention or cues, right? Are they lacking a cue? Do they have a strong negative intuitive reaction that I talked about? Is the cost benefit not in favor of them budgeting, of them saving for the future, whatever it might be, right? Is that deliberative process saying, nope, this isn't worthwhile. Motivation just isn't there. Is it something they're actually able to do? Able to do in 3 senses. One, do they have the resources, right? If they're trying to log into your app, do they have their password, right? Another sense is, do they feel that they'll succeed? Self-efficacy, as it's called in the literature, which is if you think you're going to fail at something, in most cases you aren't going to do it. That's why social proof or looking at other people taking the action is so important, because it tells you you're not going to look like an idiot if you try. So is that the obstacle that your users are facing? Do they fear that they will not be successful? Another potential obstacle is timing, right? Is there urgency to the action? Do they have any reason to do it right now versus whatever you're doing? You can think of your action in constant and cutthroat competition with every other single action that people are could be taking right now at this moment. Logging into your application, using a particular feature, whatever it might be, it's in constant competition with taking the dog for a walk, doing that report that's overdue, going skydiving, heck, whatever it might be. So why is your action urgent? There are a variety of techniques that you can use there, but this particular approach, we think of it as a funnel and people dropping out at each step of the way, helps you debug the behavioral problem. Where are people failing, right? Where are people struggling? And this, again, is when they want to take the action, but they don't. I have a penchant for cute acronyms, so when you add the word execute at the end, which is what happens at the end, you'll see this spells create, cue, reaction, evaluate, ability, timing, create. Because this is what's required, all these pieces, to create action, for someone to actually bridge the gap between intention, hey, it's something I want to do, and actually going out and doing it. So that's the first part of the process, is figure out what's actually going on with your users. It's probably something more than just your product is not awesome enough for them. And then once you know what that problem is, this eye chart is just a quick example. Don't try and read through all of it. Find the particular behavioral solution to that problem. And here's a chart that I have from the book that says, if you have a problem with attention, try this. If you have a problem with the cost-benefit analysis, try this. If you have a problem with ability, right, and it's not just a simple resource thing like a password, here are some other things you can try, social proof, etc. If it's a problem with urgency, try this, try something specific, etc. It's can't really go into the details all right now, but you get the idea of match the problem to the solution for your particular set of users. And then finally, you gotta test it. You absolutely have to test it. Human behavior is too darn complex for us to ever sit back on our couches or in our chairs and say, I will design this and this will change the world. It just doesn't happen that way. It's a process of iteration. It's an agile process, iterative process of understanding, trying with users, seeing what works, etc. Back and forth, that helps you actually fine-tune that. Now, the testing, the best way to understand impact of your product on behavior is hands down controlled experiments. That's your randomized control trial. It's also known as A/B tests or multivariate tests. They're all types of controlled experiments. That is the gold standard to figure out what's actually working and what's not. And second to that, you look at statistical models, right, trying to control for various factors, etc. And then finally, taking a look at the numbers, seeing if things look different before and after. That approach is riddled with problems because if you try and look, well, you add a new feature, are people doing things with a new feature or not? Well, it might be a different time of year, it might be a different set of users, etc. And that's why in the research community, we really look to controlled experiments, side by side, same people doing the same, similar groups of people doing the same thing, randomly assigned, to really understand whether your product is working or not. And the core assumption there is almost always you'll get it wrong. As I said, it's impossible to just sit back and posit what is going to fundamentally change your user's behavior. What I've been talking about are tips to get you in the right ballpark, but it's iteration that gets you the real solution in the end. Each time you're trying to be a little bit less wrong. And that's basically the talk. So to summarize, behavior econ is the use of economics and psychology to understand the quirks of our everyday behavior, why we do the things we do, and the nudges that we can take to help us bridge the gap between intention and action, do things that we want to do but we struggle with. Some of the lessons that we find from behavioral econ come time and time again to how fundamentally limited we are as people. Not in any terrible sense. It's just, hey, we're all human. And they quantify that, and they provide theory and structure to what it means to be, just human. It means our attention is limited, our memory is limited, our willpower is limited, our ability to handle complex decisions. And we have to design accordingly, simplifying the interface, looking for undue demands on memory across screens, etc. And often, when we are taking action, people are on autopilot altogether. They're using habits. They're not thinking at all about what they're doing. They're thinking about something else. And their brain has outsourced behavior to the cues in the environment. So what cues have you provided? And are they consistent? Are you abusing your users by changing the environment, changing your product so much that they can no longer use the habits that they've built? And then finally, assume that we're all wrong as we try and change behavior. And our goal is to become slightly less wrong over time. Look for the obstacles that people face, find the solution that resolves that particular obstacle, and then rigorously test and test and test. And as I mentioned, this comes from a book that I wrote for O'Reilly called Designing for Behavior Change, just came out 2 months ago. You can check it out quickly with O'Reilly.com, go Behavior Change. And with that, there you go. Love to, I'll check for additional comments and questions, but you can always reach out to me on Twitter at @SAWendel. About me, if you want to send me an email, also @SAWendel, LinkedIn, you get the idea. I'm @SAWendel on most platforms, and I would love to talk to you guys more. I do work with 500 startups and a variety of other accelerators to do mentoring, and I'm always curious to see how people are using these techniques, so I can learn, and sometimes so I can help as well. So please feel free to reach out to me. Would love to talk to you all. Thank you.
Thank you so so much, Stephen, for presenting a really outstanding webcast for us all today and for sharing all your knowledge and expertise. We do have several questions coming in here in the group chat. Are you able to see them, or do you want me just to read them to you?
No, I see some questions. Is that animal a fennec? Yes, actually, I think that is. That is the desert fox. Yes, I believe so. And I just love it because it's just so cute. So that's a good question. Another question is, how is this different from UX design? They're a range. So UX designers have learned a number of these lessons in their practical work. And so when people ask me, well, there are very few behavioral social scientists out there, how do we integrate these lessons into what we're doing? I say first and foremost, hire an interaction designer. Hire an interaction designer or UX person more generally who is familiar with this behavioral literature. That's the place where this stuff is most deeply into people's blood. But there are a lot of lessons that haven't taken root in the UX and interaction design community yet. For example, the lessons on habits. I think we're still just starting to understand that in the practitioner community where there's a lot of good research that we can draw on. Habits are one. Another area would be the rigor of testing our assumptions around particular UI features. One that I see time and time again is the use of carousels or sliders, etc., which a lot of people love to see, but they're actually quite distracting, and they destroy your click-throughs. Now, we see this in the AB and in email marketing communities. We see this type of information, but it's that mismatch of how do we apply each of these lessons into the UX community. Some folks get them. Some folks have gotten all the lessons. Some folks have gotten some of them, and there's a lot of diffusion to go in there. Group habits. Let me see. You're trying to get a group to do something differently. That is a very good question. I personally haven't worked much on group habits. Charles Duhigg raises this question quite nicely in his book on the power of habit, it's called, came out 2 years ago. You can just search for Duhigg Power of Habit to find his book. But from my perspective, we do, HelloWallet and my other work, we do work with large groups of people, hundreds of thousands of people at a time, to be honest, and of these large employers. And we look at each person as an individual, first and foremost. What are their behavioral obstacles? What do we do to help them in particular? And then how does the group create an environment that either says, yeah, go do this, or no, this is crazy, right? So you're building from the individuals, you're building up that social proof and the network effect. But from my perspective, it still starts very much with the individual. And I hope that answers your question, or at least provides one perspective on it, Gigi. Manish, let me see. Talked about rewards and habits loops. To decide what rewards would work, some type of consumer profiling. Yeah. So the rewards are, again, going to be particular to the individual and particular to the circumstance, right? So we've seen some strange examples of gamification where completely irrelevant and kind of out-of-band rewards are used, and people see it as forced, and they don't buy it. But when the rewards are part of the process and it makes sense for what people are doing, that seems to be much more effective. So you have to understand the context and indeed do the research, do the user research, do what's done in the UX community to understand what's really driving folks. Okay, there are a few more questions, but I think we're about at time now. So I'd love to just thank you all, and please reach out to me on Twitter, email, etc. If you have a particular problem you're working on and you'd love to just bat around some ideas, or if you have other questions. Thanks so much. Bye.
Fantastic. And with that, folks, we're going to say a really big thank you to Stephen for joining us today, for spending time with us, and again, for sharing his knowledge and expertise. Folks that attended our webcast today, we thank you for attending and hope you've benefited from it. And a big thank you to those of you that sent in your questions, because having those questions really adds just so much more to our events, so we do really appreciate it. We would also like to let you know that Stephen's book, Designing for Behavior Change, is the O'Reilly Deal of the Day. And what that means for you is you can get that book today at a great price. We push out the code to you all in the group chat as well. Visit O'Reilly.com. Look on the right-hand side. You can't miss it. It's right there. Great price today as a thank you for attending the webcast. And there is so much in there that can really help you with your day-to-day. So we invite you to take advantage of the great offer today. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everyone. This will conclude today's webcast. Goodbye, everybody.